So girls, this is session 6, and as we are digging into this session, we'll be talking about self-sacrifice. As I was thinking about self-sacrifice, I was thinking about some of the stories that came out of the Olympics in 2016. One of the stories was about two girls who were doing a race, and it was Nikki and Abby. And Abby was from the United States, and started digging into her story a little bit. Abby and Nikki were running the race. They were from different countries, and all of a sudden one of the girls fell onto the track. And the race is happening so quickly, but the story emerged kind of after the race had happened. So one of the girls has fallen and it tripped up the other girl. And between both of them, they were helping each other along. And as the story emerged, we started hearing that one of the girls had reached down and said, "This is the Olympics. You have to finish." Now, I want to stop the story for just a second and think about all of the things that brought these girls to this moment. All of the exercises, all of the late nights, all of the sacrifices that they had made to really pursue their dream of getting a medal, of winning this race. So now in this moment, one of the girls has fallen, another girl has fallen, and they're trying to figure out what's going to happen in this moment. Abby turned to Nikki and said, "We're going to keep going." What we didn't realize in that moment is that Abby had ripped a muscle, and it would be almost impossible for her to finish the race. But Abby and Nikki encouraged one another, and they did finish the race. And at the very end, this other girl from another country helped Abby into a wheelchair, and they were friends at that moment because of the sacrifices that happened. Abby could have just tried to keep on going, but she didn't. She said, "In this moment, I'm going to help this other friend up." So what does that look like? I started trying to see if there was anything about Christ in that moment. So I started trying to find out more about Abby. And what I did discover is that Abby is a believer. And she shared that as she was preparing for the Olympics, that God had already been preparing her heart for something. And she'd shared that God had let her know that this was not going to just be about the race. She didn't know what that meant. But in that moment when the two girls collided, in her heart, she said, "Okay, this is it." And so all of a sudden, she had a greater platform than just standing up and receiving a medal. She had a platform to say, "My life is worth more. My life is defined by Christ." As we look at self-sacrifice and we look at our relationship with Christ, it's interesting to note that because we know Christ and because we're in relationship with Him, we're going to find ourselves mimicking Him. He's going to transform our hearts. And so guess what? Self-sacrifice is something that Christ has modeled for us. We're going to find that showing up in our own lives. In fact, as you look in Acts chapter 11, the first time that we have the label of Christians given to us is in Acts chapter 11. Now, it was given by the Roman Empire. It actually was not meant to be a good name. We were given the name Christian, which was also denoted as little Christ. The reason they said that is because at the time, the emperor had labeled civil servants that were acting on his behalf as little Augusti. And so as Christians started acting like Christ, they just denoted, well, they're just like a little Christ, that they're acting just like Christ, which was not meant to be great. But the Christian community actually embraced that name. Yes, we want to be like Christ. We'll take that. We want to be little Christ. So again, looking at how Christ has sacrificed for us, yes, we're going to have self-sacrifice characterize us as well. When you look at Romans 12:1, Paul has said that we are to be living sacrifices, that we're supposed to present our bodies as a living sacrifice. And I remember when I first looked at that living sacrifice is such a tension, because the people of biblical times would have known sacrifices that didn't stay alive. Sacrifices that were placed on the altar were meant to stay on the altar. They were sacrificed. So when Paul presents that tension of a living sacrifice, the difference with those sacrifices are living sacrifices can get up off the altar and walk away. And so daily as Christians, we're having to present our bodies as living sacrifices to God, saying, use us. We surrender to your plans. We surrender our dreams. We surrender our next steps to be used however you want us to be used. Just like Abby, when she was looking at the race, she had to look beyond that and see how God was going to use her next steps. She knew that there was something bigger going on. When I think about my high school relationships, I remember the first time where this intersection of self-sacrifice and purity happened. I was in a relationship with a good guy. He wasn't a believer, and so we weren't on the same page when it came to what it looked like to live for Christ. He didn't know what it looked like. He would appreciate that in me, but he didn't echo that. And I remember that first moment where you prepare that you're going to be able to stand up and have courage and say no if somebody crosses that purity line for you. And thankfully, God gave me that courage in that moment to look at the relationship I was in and say no and move on to something better that God had for me. And so in this moment, it happened so quickly that I said no, and I had to just walk out of the room that I was in and drive home. And the next morning at school, realized that I had a reputation. As a Christian, it was good, but in the rest of my high school, it was difficult to explain why I had to say no and why I chose to stand my ground and why I decided to be that little Christ and really live out what it looked like. That same year, as I was dealing with all of that, God just kept drawing me closer to Him. And that was the first year that I actually got to go on a mission trip. It was my first international trip, and I remember how God provided this opportunity to go to Africa. And no one else from my high school ever had an opportunity like that. And as I went to Africa and met people and Christians and other people that didn't even know Him, I had this awesome opportunity to speak in this remote area about who Christ was. And in that moment, I remember thinking, okay, this is bigger than this relationship that I had to sacrifice. This is bigger than what I thought in the moment. And God reminded me that, yeah, we lay our life on the altar, but it's a sacrificial adventure that God helps us understand that sometimes we do give up certain dreams, sometimes we do give up certain relationships, but God is working in all of that, and God knows what He wants to do for His glory. And so we're always saying, God, use me, take my life. I'm bought with a price, is what 1 Corinthians says. I want to use my body for your glory. And it looks so much different than we could ever plan on our own. So as you dig into today's lesson, you're going to find, my prayer is that you'll understand that God has an amazing adventure for you to go on. And it won't look anything like you would be able to plan on your own. But it's much bigger than that when we offer our lives for His glory.